Welcome to the Sullivan County Dramatic Workshop, our first formal event of Dead Time Stories. I am Hecate, and I am here to read you a poem or two. Enjoy the evening. Thrice the brinded calf hath mewed, thrice and one the hedge pig whined. Harpiers cried, "'Tis time, 'tis time!" Round about the cauldron go, in the poisonous entrails throw. Toad that under cold stone, days and nights hath 31, sweated venom, sleeping got. Boil thou first in the charmed pot. Double, double toil and trouble, fires burn and cauldron bubble. Fillet of the finny snake, in the cauldron boil and bake. Eye of newt and toad of frog, wool of bat and tongue of dog. Lizard's legs and howlet's wings, for charm of powerful trouble, like a hell broth boil and bubble. Double, double toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble. Scale of dragon, tooth of wolf, witch's mummy, maw and gulf, of the raven salt sea shark, root of hemlock, dig it in the dark. Liver of blaspheming Jew, gall of goat, and slips of ewe, sylving in the moon eclipse, nose of Turk and Tartar's lips, finger of birth-strangled babe, ditch delivered from the drabe, make the gruel thick and slab, thereto the tiger's chardon, for ingredients of our cauldron. Double, double toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble! Enjoy the rest of your evening.
This story is called Johnny, I'm on the First Step. My little brother Johnny was always in trouble. My mother used to break the paddles on him. She would spank him so much. It didn't help, though. He would always do the strangest things. He's a big tease. We never knew what to expect. Like, Johnny loved liver. Do many kids like liver? Johnny loved liver so much that he would even eat it raw. Sometimes he'd take raw liver to school and he'd slurp it down at lunch just to make the other kids sick. Like I told you, Johnny was a big tease. One day, Johnny was trying to behave. That was not easy for him, but he was trying, and my mother was always glad to help him try. This day, she had an idea that she was sure would work. "Johnny, I'd like you to take these dollars and run down to the store and buy some liver for supper." Since Johnny loved liver, my mom was sure that he would do his chore right. Johnny took the dollar, stuck it in his pocket, and headed down the street. The store wasn't far, but between our house and the store was a baseball field. You know, the thing that Johnny liked more than liver was baseball. There were kids playing in the field as Johnny walked by. "Johnny, come pitch for us." Johnny was trying to be good. He wanted to buy that liver, but he loved to play baseball. "Okay, guys, but just one inning." That one inning turned into 2, and then 3, and then a game, and then more games, until mothers were calling their others home for supper. That's when Johnny remembered the liver. He ran to the store, but it was too late. The store was closed. Now Johnny was upset. Instead of being good, he had done it again. He didn't care about being spanked. He didn't think that it hurt, but he had been trying so hard to be good. Now what could he do? As he turned to go home, he saw the funeral home. It was right across the street from the store. It was called Blake's, and they fixed up bodies down in the cellar. That's when Johnny got an idea. He went behind the store and found some butcher's paper in the trash. He carefully straightened out the wrinkles and quietly slipped across the street around the back of the funeral home, and down the cellar stairs. No one was around but the dead bodies. Quickly and quietly, Johnny found the freshest body. Quickly and quietly, he found its liver. Quickly and quietly, he wrapped that liver up in the butcher's paper and slipped out of the cellar. A short time later, he handed the liver to my mother. He kept the dollar, of course. That was the only time I ever saw Johnny pass up liver. He said he didn't feel good, and everyone believed him for once. He must have felt sick. Why else would Johnny pass up liver? Me? Oh no, I didn't eat liver back then. I was really young. I didn't like mashed potatoes either. That night, when we had all gone to sleep, Johnny was still awake. He was always the last to fall asleep. I think it's because his conscience bothered him so much. Anyways, it was really late and he was just drifting off when he heard a noise. And sounded like bare feet on the walkway outside. Then he heard the voice. Johnny, I'm at your front door. I want my liver. I'm gonna get you. At first, Johnny thought he was just dreaming. But then he heard the front door open. Johnny, I'm in your house. I want my liver. I'm gonna get you. Now, Johnny wasn't afraid of much. That was one of the reasons he was always in trouble. But he wasn't feeling very brave as he heard the footsteps crossing across the bare wooden floor. Johnny, I'm on the first step. I want my liver. I'm gonna get you. Now Johnny pulled the covers over his head. Johnny, I'm on the 7th step. I want my liver. Johnny, I'm on the top step. I want my liver. I'm gonna get you. Now Johnny was scared. He was shaking so badly that he slipped down to the bottom of the bed. He was shaking so badly that he slipped right out of the bottom of the bed and onto the floor. Johnny, I'm in the hallway. I want my liver. I'm gonna get you. Johnny raced across the floor and hid in the closet. The voice was getting loud. Johnny, I'm at your door. I want my liver. I'm gonna get you. Me? Oh no, I didn't hear anything. I was fast asleep. The bedroom door creaked open. Johnny was shaking so bad that the clothes were dancing on their hangers. Johnny, I'm in your bedroom. I want my liver. I'm gonna get you. Johnny was shaking so bad that the clothes fell off the hangers and buried him under a pile. Johnny, I'm at the closet door. I want my liver. I'm gonna get you. Johnny was shaking so bad that the top shelf broke and all of our shoes fell down on top of the clothes. The shoes were doing a tap dance on his back. He heard the closet door open. Johnny.
I'm so glad that I had an opportunity to come and speak with you. My doctor recommended you highly. Just an everyday, typical housewife from suburbia. My name is Jill. I have a beautiful daughter, Cassie. My husband, Dan. We have a perfect little home in a beautiful little neighborhood, and I thought my life was amazing. My husband had gone camping that weekend. He was hunting. He's a big hunter. And I was taking Cassie home from one of her games, and she asked me in the car, out of the blue, if she could get a dog. And now I was kind of shocked. She'd never asked for a pet before, and I said, you know, she's 13. She's a very responsible, beautiful young girl. And I said, why not? So I took her down to the animal shelter, and we started looking, and we spoke to some people, and they found this beautiful dog for us, and his name was Bo, who was big. He was beautiful, brown, gorgeous. And he and Cassie hit it off. I never saw anything like it. This dog, when she moved, he moved. She went this way, he just turned and he was all over her. He was so sweet. He came right up to me, licked me up. Well, you know what it's like when you first meet a dog. Well, they have these very strict rules, and they've asked us to come a few more times to make sure that we're a good match. So we followed the rules, and things worked out beautifully. He just kept coming up to Cassie. They said he's never reacted to anyone like that but your daughter. So, by the time my husband came home from camping, we went like a family, and we picked Bo up and we brought him home. It was great the first night. She was having a wonderful time with him. He snuggled up with her right on her bed. And the next day he got up, Cassie went to school, and Bo was acting really funny. And I mean, I hadn't had him that long, but he was walking around the house and he was sniffing every corner, and I thought, well, maybe he's a new dog. But then he started growling at everything in the house. And I was getting a little nervous. And I went near him, and he would sit and he'd look up at me, and I figured, okay. So I went back inside, and I was actually working on the dishes, and he had gone over by the side of the den where my husband's man cave is. He keeps it locked because that's where our gun case is. And he was just sitting there. I said, okay. Well, went inside to do the dishes, and the next thing I hear is this god-awful noise. I swear it was a gunshot. I jumped, and I come running out, and the dog is barking, frantically barking, sitting in front of that door, and he wouldn't stop. And I'm going, oh my God, is someone in the house? But the door's locked. We always keep it locked, except the door wasn't locked. It was the oddest thing. So I went downstairs, and stupid me, I didn't even think to bring anything with me. I just walked downstairs. But everything seemed normal. But Bo was still frantically barking. I couldn't calm him down. I went and I checked the gun case. The gun case was locked. Said, must have just been something from the outside. It was just really loud. It took a while for Bo to calm down, and by the time Cassie came home, he was fine. I told Dan about it over dinner. Dan just kind of put it off to the side, and you know how men can be sometimes. Everything seemed fine, but Bo wasn't as playful with Cassie. And by that night, he was laying outside of her door instead of with her, just laying there and wouldn't move. Well, the next day, of course, Cassie goes back to school, Dan goes to work, and I'm doing house chores and taking care of things. And the dog just starts walking around the house, and again, sniffing and starts barking in corners. And I said, Bo, stop! And he looked up at me, and he started whining, and I couldn't understand it. And then all of a sudden, I hear something in the kitchen. And my coffee mug must have flown right off the counter. It was on the ground. I couldn't understand it. And he is, again, frantically barking. I don't know what to do with this dog. Finally, I just took his leash and said, let's just go outside. I couldn't calm him down. We went to the park. We have a beautiful park. I have wonderful neighbors. My neighbor Mary, she was there with her kids. She was asking about the dog, and I was telling her, and I was kind of worried that things weren't working out so well as we thought. And she said, what was he barking at? And I said, at the door downstairs. She said, didn't you know the story about your house? My house? I've only been there 5 years. What's the story about my house? She said there was a story about the neighbors. They had a young boy that lived there with them, and their son was disturbed, apparently. And I said, well, how disturbed is disturbed? I mean, come on, we see kids today, they do crazy things. She said, no, I'm telling you, this boy we used to have missing cats in the neighborhood, and everyone knew it was the boy. And I was like, come on. She says, I'm telling you, Johnny was the one that was going after those animals. She said, but that wasn't the worst part of the story. She said, one of the other boys in the neighborhood, and he used to hang out all the time. He was a real troublemaker, that kid. Well, apparently one day he was sitting in the basement with his friend, and they were playing with his dad's gun. I said, oh God, please don't tell me he shot this other kid. She said, no, it was worse. He took the gun and shot himself in the head in front of the kid. The last we knew is that family moved away, and that little boy actually wound up in a mental institution. I never knew that someone had died in our house. Well, that night I came home and Dan was there, and I told him the story, and he said, I'm just listening to neighbors' tall tales. We're having dinner, and of course the dog starts barking again. And again I hear this loud bang like a gunshot, and Dan hears it too. We go running down to his room, and across the wall is the head of his 12-point buck that used to be on that wall. There's no way that thing could have just gone flying across the room. I said, I'm telling you, there's something wrong. And again, this poor dog is absolutely losing his mind. Cassie finds I had to take him upstairs, put him in her room to stop him from barking, which didn't work. Dan and I didn't know what to do at this point. I took out a camera and I said, I'm telling you something's down here. So I took out my phone and I start taking videos. And I swear I have on that video a shadow walk across that wall. And that dog is frantically barking upstairs, and that shadow's walking and then disappears. And as soon as it disappeared, the dog stopped barking. And Cassie comes down screaming, Mommy, Mommy, Mommy. I go, what's wrong? She goes, upstairs, it's Bo, it's Bo. We went running upstairs, and there was Bo, laying down. He was gone. We had no idea. We took it to the vet. We wanted to find out what happened to Bo. They said he had a heart attack. Can dogs die from being too scared?
Ever since I was little, I've always been afraid of spiders. I used to freak and scream until my mom came in and carried them out of the garden. She always had a respect for spiders that I never understood. When I grew up and moved out, my mom passed away, and I was almost comatose. Being self-employed, I was able to take as much time as I needed to grieve, but I sank into this deep, dark abyss, and I worried that I would never get out. One night I woke up in a panic, thinking that I was being watched. For a moment, I thought it was my mom's ghost come to visit me. Imagine my horror when I looked and saw a massive wolf spider on my bedside table. I jumped out of bed out of fright. I threw my shoe at it. It didn't budge. I darted out of my bedroom. I ran to the kitchen, and I froze. Thousands of spiders all over the counter. I freaked out. I ran out to the patio to catch some fresh air. When I heard a couple arguing across the street again. They were shouting and they were throwing stuff, and it was just too much. But then I got an idea. I grabbed some fly spray and a lighter. I thought I could burn those anarchists into oblivion. I silently crept through into the kitchen, and I froze for a second. They had all lined on the table like an army. with the giant wolf spider standing in front and center, beckoning me with her arms waved up. I dropped my weapons and I approached the table, and a thought came across me that, for the first time realizing spiders meant no harm to me at all, I thought I might be able to reason with them. I approached the table about 1 feet away, and I just said to them that I would do them no harm if they just left me alone and got out of my house. My surprise is, they did. They walked down the leg of the table, across the room, to the crack in the wall. I went back to bed. For the next few weeks, the couple just kept arguing. No stop in sight. One night was particularly bad, with the police being called. An hour after they left, they were back at it. The police didn't want to deal with them, it seemed. The worst part came when I missed a contract due to missing a deadline because of their fighting. I was sick of it. I was sick of the screaming and the thrashing and the glass breaking. A terrible thought came across my mind, and I thought of firebombing their house. One night, I just saw a wolf spider again. It looked like the same one, and I took the same action. It waved its front legs at me, beckoning me to come forward. An insane, crazy idea crossed my mind. I thought, they listened the first time. Maybe I could ask them. Maybe they could help with my problem. I don't know how. The spider walked down my bedside table and left. I fell into a bottomless sleep, expecting that to be the end of it. I was woken up the next morning by the police. They asked if I had heard anything or saw anyone or anything go into my neighbor's house. Apparently they had called 911. Their house was filled with spiders. I was shocked. I didn't know how, but they actually did something. I was very surprised to find that their death was multiple spider bites. Later that same day, secretly pleased at myself that I didn't have to deal with the noise anymore, I saw the same wolf spider on the laptop speaker. I asked it if it had anything to do with what happened to the neighbors. She waved her front legs at me, as she always did. It had become endearing to me. Oh, how did I know it was feminine? Well, my mother always said that if reincarnation was real, she would come back as a wolf spider.
Something's coming for me. I know this sounds crazy, but I feel it getting closer. I'm too scared to tell anyone I know because I'm afraid as soon as the words leave my lips, it's going to come true. That's why I'm telling it here anonymously. Just like the shadows, I'm invisible here. I've never been overly religious, but I've been keeping a Bible under my pillow. I kid myself that keeping my hand on it while I sleep will keep me safe. It never stopped the sound of the dragging feet on the carpet in my hallway. I assume they're feet. It happens after midnight when everyone's asleep, apart from me. It all started after I did the thing that I won't mention. I was only dabbling, but even that must have been a sin. I know that something is watching me. It's been stalking every night, staying in the shadows, creeping closer and closer. First, I hear the strange beak chattering and clacking, and I can't think what else that could be. And if that's not bad enough, the claws being dragged along the walls, shivers straight down my spine. My father thinks the scratches are from my brother when he sleepwalks. I let it be, but my brother looks at me helplessly. He takes the blame. But why? Does he know my fate? The thing is, that thing doesn't visit him. Every night, it gets closer. I can hear the wheezing, the smell of sulfur waft around my head as I bury my face into my pillow. Last night, I heard the demons whispering. The demons who accompany that thing when it stalks. I hear the words coming to me in waves while my face digs deeper and deeper into my pillow. They tell me the time is nigh. And I have a hunch that means any time now. They tell me I already know there's nothing I can do to stop them. Unless I can find a substitute, a sacrifice. I've already stepped over the line. My soul is already forsaken. So there's nothing stopping me from doing the unthinkable. And when that evil thought crept in my head, I heard the sinister footsteps halt. It spoke volumes to me. The voices became excited. They cheered me on. Yes, that's right. Do it. When I heard the footsteps going back down the hallway and stopping at my brother's room, I let out a sigh of relief. I hadn't noticed that my Bible was gone. The voices were whispering again as my brother's bedroom door slowly creaked open. He only screamed for a moment. His voice was muffled and soon silenced. The thing shuffled back down the hallway, the voices stating simply, 2 for 1. The clacking of the beak receded as the sharp claws on the walls trailed off. I finally got up and went to my brother's bedroom. I saw that he was gone. The sheets were on the floor covering a pee stain, and I was surprised there was no blood. I knew that it was pointless telling my parents. When I got back to my room, I saw the Bible on my floor. When I bent down to grab it, I saw the words scratched on the cover. 2 for 1. I tossed it in the garbage and tried to get some sleep. Last night, after lying to my parents and telling them my brother was staying at a friend's house, I got into bed and wept. After falling asleep, I woke up to hear those dreaded footsteps and that chattering beak. Except there were 2 sets of claws this time, scraping on the walls, 2 sets of footsteps dragging along the carpet. And my blood froze when I recognized one of those voices. 2 for 1. The angry, rasping voice belonged to my brother. Not long now. There was no Bible to clutch, and my face only burrowed into the pillow for seconds, because soon it was ripped out from under me. I know that I'm damned. I know they're coming back for me. They like to tease. But any night now, I will join my brother. Something is coming for me.
Anybody in here? Huh. Books. I could get used to a place like this. Yeah, I definitely could get used to a place like this. It's kind of cold. Reminds me of a story. I call this story Cold Snap. Morgan sat in his car. The sounds of Bob Dylan's The Times Are Changing playing loud. He sat there pondering. What? Who really knows? The sound of snowflakes decorated the hood of his car like paratroopers falling from the midnight sky. When his concentration was disrupted by the cell phone ringing, he picked it up. "Hey, Morgan, are you coming inside?" It was his wife, Lori. He didn't really have an answer for her. He wanted to say yes, but the quiet that dragged on for far too long. "Morgan, are you there?" "Yes," he replied. He had barely any emotion in his voice. Very odd. "Well, are you coming in?" she repeated. He wanted to end the back and forth of pulling teeth. "In a little while," he said. "Well, good. Don't freeze to death on me," she said with a chuckle that felt a little bit more forced than it should have. He ended the call. Just then he saw the oncoming lights of a car coming down the cul-de-sac. It illuminated the body of a deer making its way to a tree, leaves abandoned long before the snow had started to fall. When he noticed that the frost started to make its way up the base of the tree, and that the deer had started to panic, pulling away from the snowdrifts, it had actually started to remove the fur and tufts of hair from its paws, or hooves, whatever you call them. I don't know. God, I could use a drink. Where was I? Oh, yes, the deer. He was panicking. Blood patches left on the snow. He couldn't find shelter when Morgan noticed another car. Stopped midway up. Two gentlemen got out and tried to help the deer find shelter. That's when it happened. Sheets of ice came pounding down. He watched as the men fled, trying to get back in the vehicle. One went around the car, the other opened the door. The haunting silhouette of the man and the dome light and the chiming of the car. Deet, 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 just echoing now. When all of a sudden his cell phone rang again. He looked down and picked up. "Yes? Is everything okay?" The call was cut short. He lowered the music to his car, and he looked out at the window as ice fell. He tried to get out, nervous now. Thump! Thump! But the door was covered in 1.5 inches of ice. He couldn't get out. He looked back up, transfixed on this deer, who was now frozen in place with a horrified look on its face of confusion. Its left hoof raised just above the snow, pointing in the direction of Morgan's car, as if to warn him of some danger he had not seen behind him. Nervous, he called his wife. It rang. "Hi, it's Lori. I can't come to the phone right..." He ended the call. All of a sudden, his car jerked, and he looked down to see that the fuel gauge had become far too low, and it puttered and stopped. Slowly, he felt the cold start to creep into the cab of his car. He leaned back and heard the music playing in the background. He smiled, turned up the volume. But I don't like stories.
I'm so glad that you could meet me last minute. I didn't know who else to tell this story to. I was going through my friend's files and we found a notebook and I got to read it, but I didn't want to talk to her about it. It seemed too personal. It's a story about her uncle and his evil legacy. Here, let me read it. So she never met him, but when she was a teenager, her mother told her that he committed suicide, and that was that. Her father, who was his brother, died from cancer, and there was no one else living in the relatives. Her dad was the only one in her uncle's will, which left the House of Horrors that was then passed over to her mother. Her Uncle Arthur's House of Horrors was called as such due to horrifying murders that he conducted before his death. He knew that the police were closing in, and many young women went missing over a period of 15 years. After his death, a subsequent investigations and cleanup, her mom finally decided what to do with the property. And by the time she was 21, there was a total refurbishment, and her mother rented it out to several people. But when she reached 30 years of age, she took over the dealings, and she had to answer many complaints about the building. The renters said that they heard screams and saw ghastly apparitions. She never believed in ghost stories, but she was a little annoyed with having to check on the property all the times of the night. And at this stage, her mom was quite ill herself, so she often went to the building alone, armed with a flashlight and her pistol. One night, at the beginning of autumn, she received yet another call from a new tenant who she said heard screams. Tired of the complaints, she felt that they were just knee-jerk reactions to the rumors and stories about the murders, and she had refused the suggestion to bring a priest or a medium in to perform a cleansing, so she just went to investigate herself. And this time, she decided to spend more time in the building, especially in the basement where no one liked to go. She told the woman to stay somewhere else for the night so that she could check the premises without anyone getting in the way. Beginning with the second floor, she swept through each room, and she did her best to keep her eyes peeled. She also kept her ears open and did hear many sounds, all of which she assumed could be easily explained using reason. When she heard the occasional moan, and she just assumed that it was just, shifting in the old framework. And at times she felt a blast of cold air and wind, and she just said that she needed to get the drafts checked. When she went to the first floor, she heard noises which sounded like screams, but she thought they were just cats fighting. And as she got to the top of the stairs, which led down to the basement, she heard a distinct guttural growl from below. Switching the lights on, she noticed the strong odor of blood hitting her nose, but she passed it off as rusty metals. And when she walked down the stairs, she heard shuffling footsteps, which made her feel like maybe squatters were there. And she called out angrily, "Who's down there?" But no one answered, so she just kept moving to the bottom of the stairs. And the hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and a blood-curdling scream came from the far end of the basement. She turned her flashlight on due to the fact that the lights didn't illuminate the whole area, but she couldn't see anything. And what made her flesh crawl was the growling sound and the weeping pleas for help. She couldn't explain them away. She kept yelling, "Who's there?" But all she heard was crying and intermittent shuffling and the occasional screams, and then she sensed a dark presence behind her, growling and chuckling. She spun around and nearly fainted when she saw the basement cluttered and messy, like it was a whole nother building. The screams got louder, and now the lights flickered, and growling presence loomed large in the background. She walked past the large wall of boxes and crates to see a scene that might as well have been straight from a horror film. 3 women hanging from the hooks in the ceiling, secured by their wrists, naked and dripping with blood. 2 of them seemed to be either dead or unconscious, while a younger blonde woman kicked and screamed. Her blood-soaked gag dropped from her neck, and she saw several deep cuts in her chest and abdomen, still bleeding. Shaking uncontrollably, she blinked many times, trying to convince herself that she was just dreaming. But it was all too real, and then she saw a scene behind the row of the hanging woman where a long steel table was being prepared by a big man. She didn't realize that she was still creeping towards the table as the man fiddled with shackles at each of the corners. He wore a black raincoat with a hood over his head, muttering and chuckled as he pulled out a hammer. She suddenly bumped into the table in shock and screamed as he turned to face her. It was her Uncle Arthur! He gave her a vicious smile and soon morphed into a scowl as he cackled loudly like a maniac and pointed at her. "On the table now, little piggy," he yelled. She turned and ran and smacked into one of the women. She felt the blood sticking to her face as she continued to scream while her uncle's strong hands grabbed her shoulders. In a split second, he dragged her back and slammed her onto the table, then quickly shackled her ankles and wrists. He wrenched the flashlight from her hand and smashed it down on her forehead. She saw stars for quite a while, she said. and she felt the blood trickle into her eyes as she heard many screams fill the air, along with howling coming from her uncle. It was like he was though an animal howling at the moon. While he slammed the hammer along the table, she felt the table shake as he continued to bring the hammer down between her legs and other parts of the table. She couldn't believe it when she started to scream and plead, "Uncle Arthur, it's me, please, don't hurt me." He was muttering again, saying incoherent things as he rummaged through the drawers of his workbench, and he turned around with a saw in his hand, looking at her in a dazed and furious way. She thought that that was it. She was going to die. There seemed to be 100 women screaming now as he brought the saw down roughly onto her neck. She saw the black-rimmed eyes as he leered at her, dribbling through rotten, gnashing teeth, growling like a beast. When the saw started tearing through her flesh, she screamed for the last time and passed out with blood and tears mingling. It seemed like an eon before she woke up, flat on her back on the table in the basement, which was now back to normal. She sat up and wondered if it was all a dream, but nothing stopped her from convincing her mom to sell the property.
Hi, I heard you were hungry, so I brought you a dish. Uncle John's beef bourguignon, secret family recipe. There's a quite interesting story about it. Would you like to hear it? Well, the women in my family are very competitive about food, especially during the holiday season. But I mean, thinking about it, they're always competitive, but especially about one holiday, Thanksgiving. One year, my Uncle John decided to throw his hat into the ring to the annual family food competition, and we heckled him mercilessly. But we thought it was something to help him deal with the grief of his dog dying, his beloved German Shepherd Champ. Uncle John loved that dog more than anything, and when he died, he was just heartbroken. He would just mope around the house. My aunt thought that maybe if he helped around or did some things around the house, he would feel better. So we started cooking, and my aunt enjoyed the relief of her cooking every meal. And the meals he would cook were just so delicious. They were flavorful and savory and sweet all at the same time. And so my aunt thought that he would easily win if he entered it into the family food competition. Thanksgiving comes around, and Uncle John's in the kitchen, prancing around with an apron on. All of us are laughing at him from the doorway. Except for one person, my mom. She was a little put off by this whole thing. Me and my dad pulled her aside. We thought she has this old belief, sort of very backwards, that men shouldn't be chefs. She says that it's not their place in the kitchen. But and I explained to her multiple times that a lot of good chefs are men. She said it wouldn't have to do with a sexist belief, but she just always felt Uncle John was acting odd. He was usually laid back, and to see him so on was a bit weird to her. The smells coming out of Grandma's kitchen were delicious. It was so good. My mom's apricot chicken, my Aunt Sophie's onion and sage stuffed turkey, and my aunt's other dishes were to die for. And my Uncle John put down a plate of beef bourguignon. My dad was so impressed that he could cook such a fancy dish. It was to die for. Amazing. After we finished all of the dishes, my grandmother took out her old fedora hat, and we started to vote for which meal was our favorite. Uncle John, of course, won by a landslide. We were all laughing at him, thinking that he was the first man to win this competition. But he was acting really weird. My mom noticed it first, and then I saw it put on. He was laughing maniacally. The weirdest part, he got on all fours and started barking. Woof, woof. Champ wins again. Great till the last bite. You wonder why I didn't want him cremated. We could not believe it. Uncle John had fed us his own dog. My aunt cried as he called the police. Of course, he needed to be treated by professionals. After vomiting, I ran out into the living room and saw him being carried away by the police, laughing maniacally as he did. That's why I don't eat dark meat, though. Everything all right?
Hey, so I found this book and I want to read it because it sounds so scary, and I think we should read it together.
I don't know.
I mean, come on. I mean, it doesn't. I don't think it's gonna be that bad. I mean, it's just about demons and
yeah,
stuff.
sure.
Okay. From an early age, I participated in weekend getaways and camps conducted by our church. I always look forward to them, as they were not your typical religious events fueled by fear and repression. It sounds like a diary almost, and I don't know. We shared stories, sang hymns, and reenacted many plays based on our biblical studies. Ghost stories were forbidden, but that didn't stop me and my friends from when we were alone in our tents. On this particular weekend, I had just turned 12, and my friends and I were having a great time. I didn't think much of it then, but it was the dark of the moon, and the play on that night was about the devil. Even though our group leader had made it a light version, we were all a little chilled by the idea of evil. Once we retired to our tents, we resorted to our usual tellings of scary stories, even though one girl protested. She was a typical prim and proper daughter of a minister, and at 13 years of age, she seemed a lot older. She told us that even though we thought these stories were harmless, that we were inadvertently letting Satan in. After a lot of teasing, we finally decided to go to sleep and turn our lamps off. I was awoken by the foul stench and icy breath. When I woke up several hours later, the horrible smell and freezing pockets of air made my hair stand up on end. As I scrambled to find my flashlight, the sound of a growl started to come up from the prim and proper girl. For the sake of privacy, they're going to call her Nancy. I whispered to her, "Nancy, is that you?" I finally found my flashlight, but my hands were shaking so hard I couldn't find the button. She didn't respond. The other two girls were still fast asleep, and the cold blasts of air and stench were growing stronger. What was also growing stronger was the deep guttural growl coming from Nancy. I wondered if a wolf had somehow made it into the tent, but when the flashlight finally shone, my blood froze. Nancy was on all fours, and her face was only inches away from mine, twisted in a horrifying grimace, snarling viciously. I fell back against the tent, but my screams were stifled by sheer terror. It was like my throat was seized up. Her blonde hair was now dirty and plastered with sweat against her misshapen head, which had sprouted horns. This is the last time they're writing down these ghost stories. I saw that her teeth were large and jagged, dripping with blood and what looked like pieces of flesh. When she suddenly lunged and twisted herself into a monstrous demon, I finally screamed. This woke up my friends, who also saw Nancy, now possessed with some kind of terrifying monster. We all continued to scream while Nancy howled, deafening us until the group leader busted from the tent. When she turned on the lamp,
Hi, my name is Janice. I'm a boudoir photographer from Liberty, New York. And this one beautiful August weekend, I invited Brian Turner from MT Studios in Michigan to come to my studio to do a spooky photo shoot. So I put out a Facebook request. Who wants to come to a free model photo shoot? Of course, everybody and their brother said, me, me, me. But by that afternoon, only one friend showed up, my good friend Anna Banana. I love her. She's really awesome. She came up into the studio wearing a silky red dress, and she brought extra props like a light chain and some red yarn. And Brian got started immediately, and he had her posing in every possible direction. He had her doing splits and upside down. And then he had her putting her head and her hands through like glass, like a frame without the glass. And it was like, wow. But you know, I was observing him and he just kept saying, it's just not that realistic enough. Okay, pose this way, put your head that way. And then he'd say, it's just not that realistic enough. Well, anyway, I thought the photo shoot went well. And then we were all packing up, and Anna pulls me aside and she says, where did you say you know this guy from? And I told her, we're Instagram boudoir buddies. We have been Instagram friends for months now. I follow him, he follows me, so everything's okay. Anna thanked us. She started to head out, and Brian pulls me aside and he says, hey, how about you and Anna come to my hotel room? I have way better lighting than your studio, and I have bigger and better props than anything. And I said, Brian, why didn't you tell me so in the first place? Let me go see if Anna will come. I go to Anna's car and I go, want to go to the hotel? Anna says, are you sure this isn't going to be a sexual escapade or something? I mean, really, she was really hesitant. But I was like, bigger, better, photos, free. I mean, come on, who wouldn't take up on that? So she said, okay. I give the thumbs up to Brian, and we head to his hotel room. By this time, it's pitch dark outside, just like you can't see anything other than our car headlights. Well, we followed him into his hotel room. He opens up the door. This room was lit up, literally lights in every direction, heavy chains hanging from the side, this big bed with black silky sheets and ropes. And Anna was like, he did all this to a hotel room? Like, wow. Anyway, Brian says, hop up on the bed. Of course, I'm like, let's go, ready to do another photo shoot. And Anna, of course, sits casually at the end of the bed, hesitant. That poor Anna. But it's okay, because I knew that this was going to be the most awesome thing ever. Okay, so then Brian throws us the ropes and he says, start tying each other up. Make it look sexy and freaky. So I, of course, tie Anna up. And then he comes over and ties me up. And then he steps aside for a minute, and good old hesitant Anna, what does she say? Like, where's his tripod and camera? And what the heck is that gigantic bag of props? I don't know, Janice, this is... Anyway, he comes back over, ties our knots extra tight, and he goes over to his prop bag and he starts pulling out things. He has this huge butcher knife. I know. And then this meat grinder. We were like, for a photo shoot? Well, it's okay, because he's Brian and he's going to make it look so crazy. And then he pulls out a chainsaw, and Anna makes these grimacing sounds like, but it's going to be fine. Okay, so we are so ready. And then what? I had to pee. You always have to pee. Like, what the heck? So I'm like, Brian, just let me loose from these ropes and let me go pee. It'll be really quick, and I'll come back and we'll get going. And Brian looks around the room, and his eyes look left and right and up and down, and then he looks me in the eye and he says, no! And I was like, no? What do you... I really got to go pee. And Anna says, I think he's serious. I think he's serious. So I would like to give it one more try. Brian, I really have to pee. And he says, I said no. The only way I will let either of you loose is if you give me blood. Real blood and body parts. And then Anna just goes ballistic. She's like, oh my God, okay, I'll do anything you want. What do you want me to do? This is crazy. He's real. What do you want me to do? And so he picks up the frame, and this time it has real glass. And he says, I will undo your ropes. You stick your hand through the glass. I'll shoot photos, and I will let you go. And I'm just watching this whole thing. And she does it. He undoes her hand. She pulls her hand back and thrusts her fist through the glass. oh my God, there's shards of glass everywhere, and her arm is all broken up in pieces, and there's blood spewing all over me, and it stinks. The stench of blood is disgusting. Have you ever smelled it? Ooh. Then he starts shooting photos. Snap, snap, snap. And then he sets her free. And then she just runs the heck out of there. And she leaves everything behind. Her cell phone, her keys, and me. That bitch. And I'm still there like, ah. And so then Brian comes up to me and he looks at me and says, "Your turn, Janice. Fingers or toes? Fingers or toes?" And I'm like, I don't know, and fingers or, either one. I don't care which one you take. And he starts, says, "I'm gonna chop them off, and I'm gonna take pictures, and I'm gonna set you free too. Do it! Chop oh, shit! Chops my fingers and my toes. It was horrible. It was horrible. And now I'm here 4 months later, fingerless, toeless. He got away. I don't even know how. Never, ever trust a random Instagram friend.
I'm going to read an account of my late father and his encounter at an abandoned farmhouse. As a ghost hunter who predominantly collects EVP recordings, this case tipped the scales in me in many ways. I usually follow guides created by other paranormal investigators, but this case seemed to fall right in my lap, or so it seemed. Traveling on my way to another haunted location, my spidey senses went off as I passed a rundown farmhouse. I usually follow guides created, when I reversed and stopped in front of the property, I could almost hear the screams and growls in my head. Strangely enough, there were no signs blocking the entrance to the property, so I grabbed my equipment and went in. I found it odd that the majority of the trees and plants surrounding the old house were either dead or dying. The house itself also looked like it was decaying from the inside out, along with the surrounding buildings and sheds. As I crept up to the front porch, I saw that it was crumbling around the concrete steps that led up to the front door. Stepping slowly and lightly, I noticed the cracks in the concrete and then old boards nailed to the door. The disembodied voices started before I even got into the house. I switched one of my EVP recorders on, then I pulled on the boards, finding them flimsy and easy to rip off. The door opened on its own. Creepy enough, but I have to remember that the dangers were more than structural. I walked slowly, testing the floorboards as I went, but the familiar pricking up of my hairs and chills hit me fast. Surprisingly, the center of the house was sturdy, so I walked freely into the kitchen, but then froze in my tracks. A woman was slumped on the floor under the sink with a large knife stuck in her chest, trickling blood. I was able to see right through her, and I realized that I was in the middle of a residual haunting. But then she looked up. The pain in her face was horrible, but she managed to raise her hand and point upwards. Then she screamed. I looked around, but nobody was there. So I turned back as I trembled in fear to see the woman standing up. Still screaming, she pointed up again. Her head began to twitch and shake uncontrollably with her mouth wide open. I knew that I had to investigate, even though I was nearly peeing my pants. So I went out and ran up the stairs. When I got to the top, I heard the boards behind me creaking with slow footsteps. I spun around, but nobody was there. I felt like I was being stalked, but I had to push on. I went into the bedroom at the front of the crumbling house. Again, the door opened on its own, making my flesh crawl. Then I saw a small boy lying in a pool of his own blood. I couldn't help the tears falling down my face, but I was distracted by a nasty growl close to my right ear. Angry now, I turned around and yelled, "Who are you?" But I didn't get a response, so I looked back at the little boy. He lifted his head and pointed towards the back of the house. My head was spinning as I didn't know what to do. Then the boy sat up and yelled in his tiny voice, "Help us," while he continued to point empathetically and cry. I ran over to the room on the other side, feeling like something was controlling me while a chill ran through my body. When I got to the room, the door opened violently this time, smashing against the wall while the handle rattled. A teenage girl was flung across an old bed with slashes all over her body. A river of blood ran under the bed. Then I heard a menacing laughter in the distance, which fueled my anger. The girl slowly sat up and pointed to the left. Her pretty face was littered with gashes and bruises. I was weeping angry tears for this ghost family who had obviously been viciously attacked by a sadistic killer. I could still hear the screams from the mother and the little boy, along with the gurgling from the girl on the bed. It was clear that she had her throat slashed, but she was trying to speak as she pointed towards the back of the house. Feeling that I might find the killer there, it took some time for me to build up the nerve to keep moving. I was never annoyed with myself for stepping into this nightmare without backup, as I'd never faced anything like it before. Then I remembered my video camera, so I activated it and pointed it all over the place while I continued on my way. The gurgling and crying and screaming went on as I crept down the landing to the room at the back, shivering in fear. Before I even got to the room, I heard a slow creaking of the door, which made me shudder and move slower. My body shook as I made it to the door, where I expected to face the killer responsible for the death of this family. Instead, I saw a grown man in a chair, with an axe deep in his head. There's a pool of blood under the chair. Somehow, I knew this had been the father, and that he couldn't speak, but he slowly lifted his hand and began to point. A chill swept through my soul as I realized that his finger was pointing directly at me. Was I the killer? As I thought that, the father pointed more empathetically at me, and the screams and noises from his family increased. While I stood there, dumbstruck, wondering what he meant, I felt a blast of evil hit my back, freezing my body. Then a putrid stench wafted over me, and the father continued to point anxiously to the space behind me. Finally, I was able to turn around as an unholy growling began to filter through the screams of the whole family. This time, I did pee my pants, as I realized I was face to face with the most evil entity I have ever encountered. Keep in mind that until that day, I had only ever captured voices on my EVP recorder. I had never seen a real ghost. Now I was only centimeters away from a murderous monster who had slaughtered an innocent family in cold blood. At first, I had no idea what I had to do, and it was obvious that this sinister specter found this fact amusing. He looked like a big gorilla of a man who had escaped an insane asylum with huge black eyes and an awful sneer. Then I remembered I had a mini Bible on my keychain, which my mother had given me before she passed away. I whipped my keys out, and with trembling fingers, I flipped the Bible open and shoved it in the ghost's face. It was all I could think of, but it worked. I yelled, "Leave them alone! Go to hell where you belong!" He screamed like a demon splashed with holy water. As I raged along with the family's screams, he disappeared. I turned around, and the father was gone. As I raced through the house, I saw the whole family was gone. The house was empty, but free from evil. When I got back to my car, I finally broke down and cried happy tears. I wasn't even mad when I got home and discovered my equipment had malfunctioned with no evidence.
The day I found footage of my fiance's murder. This is probably risky for me to share for reasons I may or may not reveal here, which is why I choose to remain anonymous. It happened some time ago, and I'm still trying to make sense of it all. It started way before I found the video footage. When my fiancé Terry and I met, I knew that it was meant to be and that we were kindred spirits. I was very passionate and so deeply in love with Terry. So when he went missing, you can bet I was beside myself with grief. His parents and I searched and searched for months, and the police held me under suspicion for ages. They didn't leave me alone for over a year, but when the case went cold, I had to move on. 2 months ago, Terry's mother asked me to return whatever items I had that belonged to him. At first I was annoyed, but I understood, seeing as he was their only child. While I was packing his books, I came across an unmarked DVD in a flimsy plastic sheath. I was curious enough to slip it into my drive. At first, I recognized the forest where we used to go camping and hiking. It brought back memories and emotions I had deliberately pushed to the furthest recesses of my mind. I could hear our laughing as we made our way up the path through the woods, and then the camera, it was trained on Terry. He laughed into the camera and he said, "Are you ever gonna switch that thing off?" "Soon," I said teasingly. I got a lump in my throat watching him as we peeked and began setting up our camp. Then the video went fuzzy, and my stomach lurched when I saw Terry strapped to a camping chair, gagged and bound. He was naked, apart from his boxers, and muffled screams came from behind his gag. I watched the video in horror as I taunted and teased him, seeing my own hands shoot out, occasionally stabbing and slashing his flesh. Yeah, while profusely screaming and grunting, "Ah!" and he's sweating. "He's coming, Terry. We have to feed the beast, Terry. This is what you get for cheating, Terry. The demon is hungry, Terry." As I continued circling and slashing and taunting him, the sound of something came crashing through the trees and caught my attention. Laughing maniacally, I trained the camera on the forest. A huge black mass came out into the clearing. I am shivering with excitement as I tell you this. The creature was glorious. A 6-foot-tall, hunched-back thing slowly crept toward us on hind legs. Its wet lips, mottled fur, were visible in the moonlight, along with its bloodshot eyes. The camera was placed on a stump, pointing at the scene, which included Terry still screaming in the chair. And then I saw myself crawl on hands and knees toward the beast. It leaned over and stroked my hair before straightening up and focusing on Terry. And then the entity praised in a deep, dark voice,
"You've done well, my pet."
And then he stomped over to Terry and peeled the skin from his face, skinning every part of his tortured body. The video went fuzzy again, and eventually it stopped. after a long period of high-pitched, unholy wailing. Needless to say, I did not hand that DVD over to Terry's mother. It all came flooding back to me after I watched it, and I marveled at how quickly and completely I had blanked that night out. I was glad, and I'm still glad that I remember now. It answers so many questions, and it leaves me free to reconnect with my master. If you ask me, Terry asked for it, and I regret nothing. I could never clearly substantiate that cheating story, but I was certain he betrayed me. The demon told me so.
I gotta get the hell out of this place. What the? That was not there before. That was not. You definitely weren't here before, and neither were they. Do you live here? You live here? Are you the quack? The head doctor, the shrink? All right. I am sorry. I don't know how I got in here. The door was open. Do you mind if can I tell you? All right. So the story I'm going to tell you, right, is about a boy and his mother. So they lived in upstate New York, over by the Albany area. And, well, Lincoln was his name. He was just a toddler at the time when his father left his mom, and they came upon hard times. And it was really, really difficult for them to make ends meet. Unfortunately for Lincoln, his mother began to drink, and that led to physical and verbal abuse to a whole different level, to where terms like, "my darling," and, "you little bastard," those things, yeah, those became things of almost like terms of endearment for Lincoln. And he, as they continued to happen to him, as the abuse continued to happen, he became more and more withdrawn into himself. So much so that the school would later send a guidance counselor to come and, check up on Lincoln, see how he's doing, making sure, why, or making sure there's nothing leading up to why he's acting this way, why he's become so reclusive. And, he saw the guidance counselor coming from his driveway in from the bay window. But Mommy just, his mom just put on that act, that Mother of the Year act. Sold it so well. And Lincoln sat at his bay window and he watched as the guidance counselor walked away. That was immediately followed by the opening and shutting of doors, cabinets, cupboards in the house, looking in all the hiding spots for Mommy's little liquor bottles. And that was followed by, "Lincoln! Lincoln, you little bastard, come downstairs!" And Lincoln would come downstairs, slowly, head lowered, hands and arms to the side, as he walked down, stand in front of his mom. "Have you been telling lies about Mommy? Have you, you little bastard?" And I said no. And that's when I felt her hand grab my face. Her bony hand grabbed my jaw. And I smelt the liquor, and her spit wafted over me. "Don't you lie to Mommy!" That's when she threw me back, and my head hit the ground. Anyway, she would become not as bad, I guess. Less involved. Asleep and drunk more often than not. She did have one act of kindness, and she bought me an easel and a paintbrush. God, I love that easel. I could paint anything, from sunsets to sunrises. They were beautiful, all of them. The paint just came to life off my brush. Anyway, that was the only nice thing she ever did for me. Later, the school would send a letter. I would never see it. And the letter would tell her that I was accepted to an excelled art school at a nearby college. Oh, no, not her son. She wouldn't be fed with those lies. No son of hers is going to be taught that he's going to be something that he's not. She didn't want them to poison his mind. Right? So she withdrew me from school. Told the school, from now on, my son will be homeschooled. Again, the drinking became more excessive. The abuse became more excessive. Later, she would leave for the store one day, and I would go out with my easel and my paintbrush, and I would begin to paint the landscape. It was always my favorite, really early in the morning, right? And you could see it. It was so beautiful. I've actually heard people say that if you looked at the painting, you could touch it and feel the moisture from the wet of the grass. That's how realistic it was, right? Well, I started to think about how lonely, how like I didn't have any of those interactions that you would normally have at school with other children, right? And I was really alone, and I longed to have a companion. So I started to paint a puppy. A little golden dog with a red rubber ball. And all of a sudden I froze because I could hear the jingling from the collar. So I peered around the painting, and there in the grass was the puppy that I had drawn with his red rubber ball. Not thinking, I ran over to it and I picked it up and I nuzzled it, and its wet muzzle pushed into me and started to lap at the tears as they streamed down my face. I wasn't thinking, because I scooped it up and I ran back into the house up to my room with it. I was just so happy to have something that loved me. That loved me. When an hour would pass and I'd hear the slamming of the car door and the footsteps and then that voice. Oh, my bastard, where are you? Come downstairs, my little bastard. I have something for you. I'd placed the puppy on the bed. I told him, shh, be quiet, stay here. And I left. But, when you're little and you're scared, you forget things. And I forgot to close my bedroom door. I made my way downstairs really quick. And as I got to the landing, I saw that Mom had this easel and these paints that I had left stupidly outside for her to find. Get down here now, you bastard! So I walked down and I shuffled past her, terrified to make eye contact. Never make eye contact. Do you know how much these cost me? You little bastard! Have you no respect for Mommy? I didn't have any words. And as she talked, I heard a growl almost immediately in her voice. So I looked up and I realized it wasn't her growling, but that the puppy had come downstairs and was now at the bottom of the stairs with its hackles raised, growling at my mom. Oh, she wasn't having any of that. My mom quickly pivoted on her foot. You could hear the clank of the spent liquor bottles in her damn purse as she marched over to the dog and punted it. The dog flew and hit the wall. The yelp and the bones cracking were audible. It made my teeth chatter. And I watched as she pummeled this dog with her purse till it was nothing more than a mound of fur. The energy changed in the room. I don't really remember much, but I heard the paintbrush going. And I saw the easel. And is that what you think of Mommy? And I looked, and I'd seen I had started to paint a portrait of my mother with her face, a visage of hatred, ugliness, twisted and contorted, with her hand raised. When I started to hear her growling again. And she shifted and looked, and the puppy, now no longer a puppy, but a medium-sized dog, was growling and back up on all fours with its hackles raised. Oh, Mom wasn't scared of that. You think you could scare me, you stupid, filthy mongrel? She turned away and she started to walk. This is where it becomes really blurry. She starts to walk towards the puppy. And I hear my voice say, Mom? Oh, she didn't like that. You don't ever call her Mom. She spun around with her hand raised high in an absolute perfect replica of my painting. And that's when I knew what I had to do. What did you call me? Her eyes widened as she saw the canister of paint thinner in my hands. And I raised it above my head, and I began to rhythmically douse this portrait of her as her eyes widened in horror as her hand started to melt right in front of her face. Her cardigan, that brand new cardigan she friggin' bought, smoked, and the audible thump of her purse hitting the floor. I heard the coroner said that all that could be found of Kathy Morris was a gelatinous pile of human waste that could only be identified by the teeth. As for Lincoln, I think it's pretty safe to say you know that's me now. Well, all they found was a rubber ball. A red rubber ball.
When Stella was a child, she spent many years in the hospital due to a reoccurring issue with her upper respiratory system. She also suffered from many bouts of tonsillitis, and when her family moved out to a different city, she got them out. Her parents were thrilled that they were able to get her to a children's hospital where the facilities were state-of-the-art. Even though the building was older, the interior was sparkling white and full of wonderful staff and doctors. When she was admitted, she was taken to the oldest part of the building at the back, where she was seen by a great doctor. Even though the ward was bright and happy, it was decorated with fun motifs and lots of toys and books. After the tonsillectomy, she was feeling poorly, so the nurses and doctors brought ice cream and jelly many times. On the day after her operation, the doctor brought a clown into the ward, as well as a special gift for her, a ukulele. The problem was, she has been terribly afraid of clowns since she was little. Even though the clown played with the other kids and entertained them with songs and games, he freaked her out. Every time he looked over at her, she would feel a chill down her spine. It was like he showed her a different side of himself. She wondered why the other kids weren't creeped out by him, seeing as the sinister vibes were pretty intensely obvious to her. When he approached, she felt the air react, like it was being snap frozen as he leered over at her by the foot of the bed. To her, he seemed like he lived in a dumpster, as he had a veneer of filth on him, like he was spray painted with dirt. He smiled at the other kids, and they seemed to adore him, but when he looked over at her, the smile turned vicious. When the nurse came in to check on her, she asked if she could just be moved to a different part of the ward. The nurse advised that that just wasn't possible. The nurse asked why she wanted to move to a different point, where then she pointed to the clown without speaking. The nurse laughed and shook her head. As she leaned in and said, "There's nothing to be afraid of, sweetie. He's been coming to the hospital for years." When the nurse left the ward, the clown slowly turned back and looked at her. His face twisted into an evil grin, and his eyes flashed. She jumped when she heard the strings of her ukulele strum twice, but then tried to convince herself that she was imagining it. After the clown left and her parents turned up for a visit, she cried and begged them to take her home. Her mom asked her why, and she told her that she was just afraid of the clown. Her dad advised that he wouldn't hurt her and just to relax. Then Mom told her that as long as the clown was only there when the staff were there, that she was safe. When they left, she was too afraid to go to sleep, but the nurse came in and gave her a drink that soon put her under. Many hours later, she was awoken by the strumming of the ukulele, which was playing slowly and deliberately. She tried to ignore it, talking to herself, and then accidentally kicked it over or something. When the strings continued to be strummed, she realized that she could sense something evil in the ward next to her bed. Even though she was groggy, she sat up and rubbed her eyes. When she finally opened them properly, she saw a dark shadow. Now the ukulele played violently, like a crazed lunatic was ferociously whipping at the strings with their fingers. Then she saw the deranged clown from earlier in the day laughing hysterically as he played the ukulele next to her bed. As the clown leaned over her, she saw tiny blood drops on his face. She tried to scream, but her throat was sore and constricted, far worse than it had been several hours earlier. Then the clown inched closer to her face, and he grinned with dagger-like teeth that were red with dripping blood. Thinking fast, she reached out and hit the panic button on the side of her bed, while the clown started to fade away. The ukulele fell to the floor as the night nurse came in. Then the panic button turned off. Then they picked up the instrument. She playfully scolded her, "No musical instruments at nighttime." The girl cried out, "It was an evil clown. He did it." The nurse laughed, checked her pulse, and said, "Nonsense. Everyone loves Flip Flop. He's been with us for years." When she said his name, she froze. But the girl didn't know why. Maybe it was her small mind just going into overdrive. She put the ukulele on the nightstand and laid her back down before leaving the ward. She couldn't go back to sleep. Through the rest of the night, she stayed awake, mulling over the clown's name in her mind and trying to forget it. Finally, when she fell asleep in the morning, it was too late. She was awoken by the day nurse and the doctor, who tried to get her to eat. They didn't believe her when she told him about the visitations, and they said that they just might be the medications. After telling the nurse to change the meds, he handed the ukulele to her and smiled, saying, "Don't forget to practice." She couldn't eat her breakfast and soon fell asleep, only waking in the afternoon when the clown visited the ward. The children were calling out, "Flip flop, flip flop," as the ukulele began to strum. She felt a chill running through her body. When she sat up, the clown turned to face her with his vile smile, so she grabbed the ukulele and put it in the drawer. For the rest of the afternoon, he left her alone. But after dark, the visitation took a creepy, nasty turn. Later, she was woken by the distant sound of the ukulele. Once again, she was groggy, but her heart was racing. Then she saw the clown creeping towards the foot of her bed with the ukulele in his hands, strumming violently. She tried to scream, but once more her throat failed her. When he crept along the side of her bed, she ran out. It was odd that the nurses couldn't see her as she ran past their station, and she knew the clown was right behind her. As she raced down the halls, trying to find a way out, she heard the crazy ukulele as the clown gained on her. When she reached the dead end, she remembered the words of her father, "You have to face your fears." This seemed idiotic to her now, but she trusted her father, so she turned around and backed against the wall. The clown seemed to be 10 feet tall as he bore down on her with his terrifying smile and jagged, dripping teeth. Suddenly, he knew what to say. So, she yelled in a hoarse voice, "Give me my ukulele!" He stopped and shrunk 4 feet. She realized that he was now a normal clown with a happy smile and a kind face. He handed the instrument over. She was speechless when he disappeared and she was left holding the ukulele, which she still has in her possession. Wow. Hospitals are frightening for anyone, but they gotta be even worse when they're haunted.
Hey, Doc, so I was upstairs and I was looking around your stuff. I found looks like an old Edgar Allan Poe story, Telltale Heart. What the hell happened here? You have a really serious infestation, bro. Oh, wow. What happened? I was literally gone for like 3 minutes. You look terrible. Do you want me to call a doctor? Or you want to hear the story? I'll read you the story. All right. True! Nervous. Very. Very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am. But why will you say that I'm mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all, was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none, passion there was none. I loved the old man. He never wronged me. He never had given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with film over it. Oh, whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of that eye forever. Now, this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with. Man, I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, that no light shone out. And then I thrust my head in. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening, so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it, just so much that a single thin ray fell upon that vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights. Every night, just before midnight, I found the eye always closed. And so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning, when day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in hearty tone, and inquiring how he passed the night. So, you see, He would have been very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just after 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than mine did. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers of cunningness. I could scarcely contain the feeling of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at it, the idea. And perhaps he heard me, for he moved in the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now, you think that I drew back, but no. His room was black as pitch, with thick darkness, for the shutters were closed, fastened through fear of robbers. And so I knew he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it in steadily. I had my head in, and I was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening. The old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still, and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle. And in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in bed listening, just as I have done night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was a groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh, no, it was the low stifled sound arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it was welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say, I knew it well. I knew that the old man felt and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them cautiously, but could not. He had been saying to himself, it is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor. Or, it is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp. Yes. He had been in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim, and it was a mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little part of the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily until the length, a simple dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot out of the surface and fell upon the vulture eye. It was open wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all the dull blue with that hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow of my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray, as if by instinct, precisely upon that damned spot. And I have not told you that what you mistake for madness is an over-acuteness of the sense now. I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates a soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could to maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, louder and louder. Every instant, the old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, and I say louder, every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous. So I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to an uncontrollable terror. Yet, for some minutes longer, I refrained and stood still, but the beating grew louder and louder. I thought the heart must burst, and I knew anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by the neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped on into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor. I pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon his heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took the 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between them. I then replaced the floorboards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. Then I had made an end of these labors. It was 4 o'clock still, dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with the light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged in the police office, and they, the officers, had been deported to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them to search well. I led them at the length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought the chairs into the room. I desired them to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still they sat and still they chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling. But it continued and gained defiantlessness until at length I found the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale. I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice, yet the sound increased. And what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I grasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, but the noise steadily increased. I aroused and argued about trifles in the high key and with a violent gesturation. But the noise, it steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men. But the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I had foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards. But the noise aroused over all and continually increased. It grew louder, louder, louder. And still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled, as if possibly they had not. Almighty God, no, they heard. They suspected, they knew. Oh, they were making mockery of my horror. This I thought, this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now again, hark! Louder! 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 Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more! I admit the deed! Tear up the planks! Here! Here! It was beating his hideous heart, the telltale heart.
Aunt Jen, look, I found the poem that you always... Aunt Jen? You're sleeping again. It's whatever. I'll read it anyway. Okay. The Raven. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door, only this and nothing more. Ah, distinctly I remember, it was the bleak of December, and each separate dying ember wrought this ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow of the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This is it and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," I said, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door, darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into the darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the darkness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word Lenore. Then I whispered, and echo murmured back the word Lenore, merely this and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon I heard again a tapping somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see, then, where there is, their mystery implore. Let my heart be still a moment and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter, and there stopped a stately raven and the saintly days of yore. Not at least obscence made he, not an instant stopped or stayed he, but with mien or lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. This ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shown and shraven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven, ghastly, grim, and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what the lordly name is on that night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marveled, this ungainly fowl I hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little reverence bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely at the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing further than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely moved, then mutter, "Other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before." Then the bird said, "Nevermore." Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, "Doubtless," I said, "what it utters is it only struck and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dregs of his hope and melancholy burden bore of nevermore." But the raven still beguiling all my sad soul into smiling, straight I wheeled a cautioned seat in front of the bird and bust and door. Then, upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself for linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly gaunt of ominous bird of yore, meant in croaking Nevermore. This I sat engaging and guessing, but no syllable expressing, to this fowl whose fiery eyes now burden into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining, on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight glowered o'er, but whose velvet violet lining, whose the lamplight gloating over, she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfume from the unseen censer, swung by angels who faint-footed falls, tinkled by the tufted floors. Wrench, I cried, thy God hath lent thee by the angels he sent thee. Respite, respite, and from thy memories of Lenore, quaff these kind, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, I said, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether temper sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, and this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there a balm enguiled? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, I said, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by the heaven that bends above us, by the God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aden, it shall clasp an sainted maiden, who the angels named Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden, who the angels named Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or friend, I shrieked upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as the token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy break from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flinting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeing of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him seems throws of his shadows on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. That's it. Aunt Jen, I found another. Oh, Aunt Jen? Okay, you can hold that. I was gonna read you a story, but I'll read it to you instead. Okay. Mary had a little lamb, its fleece as white as snow, and everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go. She brought her lamb to school one day. The kids let out loud jeers. The children took her lamb away, and Mary choked on tears. Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was red as blood. She took its little body home and swore she'd hurt them good. She knew the lamb's blood called things ancient, hidden, and deep. As Mary painted signs of old, never did she weep. Mary had a little lamb. It's made her something scary. Now I dare you, look in the mirror and whisper, Bloody Mary.